Well, the problem is if you've borne that name for 60 or 70 years with a native reference, and by and large in the American vernacular, those words have been associated with native people. Simply changing the logo, which frankly many schools don't use those logos predominantly anyway. Even the native logos aren't oftentimes used as predominantly as they once were. It's the name. So if you're still going to have warriors across the chest as these kids are running up and down the basketball court or running across a football field, not much changes. And so if you want to become a knight, then change your name to a knight. If you want to be a Spartan or a Trojan or whatever, a gladiator, then be a gladiator. But there's all obviously there's only one reason for trying to keep the name and change the logo. It's because they don't want to change. And so to from a legal standpoint, to say we summarily rejected it as an advisory council, I'm just saying that every one of the conversations that we've had, and we have another meeting coming up on Thursday. Every time we've heard one of these, somebody in the group or several of the group has really spoken out against it, and we've seen manipulations of language. Like I said, Watkins Glen tried to keep the name Seneca's and say now it referred to the lake, yet there were some grammatical errors in how you would how would you use the word Seneca's pluralized if you were referencing a lake. And the same thing with what Fonda and Fultonville had gone through. They wanted to retain the name Braves, but suggest that the word brave that they were referring to was the last word of the national anthem. In fact, in the letter, the superintendent said the word in the national anthem is a noun. Well, I'm sorry, you should have consulted your English teachers, because it isn't. Just because it is home of the brave, it's still not a noun, it's an adjective, and you don't pluralize an adjective. And if you're going to say each individual student there is are braves collectively, then you haven't really changed anything. And it doesn't look, if you're just going to use your letters of your school and still call yourself braves, then not much has changed. So this is the problem that we have as native people in the manipulation that some of these schools are trying to do to keep from really changing.
All right. Well, yeah, I think a lot of people watching, listening to this might say, you know what, John, I'll give you Redskins, I'll give you Indians, I'll give you Chiefs, I can even give you Braves, but Raiders, Warriors,
How is it for you?
native people have no claim to Warriors or Raiders, do they? I mean, what? How?
No,
And
in fact,
where does it stop?
we don't have claim to any of those words. None of those words are ours. I mean, except for even when they use the names of our specific nations, like Mohawks, or there's a school out near Albany that calls themselves they stuck Mohawk, Onondaga, and Seneca together to form the name of their school.
They did, yeah.
And but that's not our word either. So no, none of these words. The point is that these words have referenced us, and they have done it for half a century or more. So our problem is their refusal or the resistance to reject what was called for 20 years ago by the commissioner then, Dr. Richard Mills, and has been called for back in November by Dr. Betty Rosa to say, or I'm sorry, it was actually Deputy Commissioner James Baldwin, who said, no, it's time. It's time to get rid of it. And to the extent that they offered one exception, it was only the exception. And I think it was geared more towards Salamanca than any place, because Salamanca happens to be located on Seneca territory. So they wanted to give some deference to the Seneca Nation as it related to that. As of what I've heard, I haven't heard any suggestion that the Seneca Nation has given the Salamanca School District permission to continue to use the Warriors. Only 20% of the student body, which is a pretty significant amount for most schools, are native. So you still have, here is the problem. You still have students who are being taught and encouraged to take that identity on themselves. And most of the resistance we have isn't actually from the students, it's from alumni who've been out of school for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, who are still clinging to that identity. So that's part of the reason that we're saying that this has to go. Let it be a clean sweep. Clean the slate. get a new mascot or don't have a mascot at all. I mean, do these schools really need nicknames? Consider this also. Many schools have had to merge with other schools to continue to have a football team, for instance, or a lacrosse team, or some of those teams that require more participation. So why should one school's mascot dominate the name of a team when it's two teams that are that have merged together, sometimes even more than two teams to form? Just call your team the school name for that matter. But I mean, if people are still going to obsess over mascots, and again, let me say, no mascot is obsessed over more than native ones. You've never have anybody obsessing over animal names or any of the other dehumanized names that are used for mascots. We're the only people that are used this way. I've encouraged people. I said, look, just for example, if you wanted to pretend to honor black people, or if you wanted to intentionally honor black, how would you do that in a mascot? I mean, is there any way that you could appropriately do it? And of course, the answer is no. Or Jewish people, or Hispanic people, or other Asian, you couldn't.
So even if they said, brave is not a disparaging term. It's a brave. It's a Native American who was brave. That's not
the point. We're not saying that the terms are disparaging. We're saying the idea that you're taking our identity and claiming it for yourselves, and that and in doing so, you've projected characteristics that may or may not be true about us onto your new logo or mascot, and then and when you have used us, you've always treated us as relics of the past, as if we're not here anymore. So it's always been like an 18th century image of a native person, or a spear, or a tomahawk, or a war club, or feathers, or something. There's nothing contemporary about using. And in fact, when our contemporary voices are raised, they're ignored or rejected out of hand.
Okay.
And and I'm pleased that Dr. Rosa and Dr. Baldwin encourage a Native council to be a part of the decision-making process. I think it's important because I don't want to see this thing politicized. I don't want to see the right making it sound like that it was just the rich elite left that is behind this. No, we are behind this, and we've been protesting this for 50, 60, 70 years in some cases.
Yeah, because and I know, because people are going to see this and say, when it comes to words like warrior and a different look, we from the school district's perspective, we've compromised, taken a name, changed a logo. There's no reference to Native people in it at all, and you folks are just going too far with this.
Well, I mean, the state ed wanted us to be a part of the process, and we know that when you've had 50 or 60 or 70 years of using those same names with a native reference, the idea of trying to bury a logo or an image doesn't mean that those words don't continue to have the same effect. And so that's where we're coming from here. Look, if you had used a Spartan for your mascot for 70 years and still called it a warrior, yeah, I think you could make that argument. But if you're just saying, no, we're not going to accept what the state's trying to make us do, or the Native people are going to, so we're going to try to disassociate ourselves from from a Native meaning, even though it's clearly been what the American vernacular has suggested over the last half a century or more.
Right, because I mean, nobody's running up and down the sideline with a kid dressed up like an Indian with a tomahawk, right, or anything like that anymore. They just,
I don't know if they're doing that anymore. They were still doing it at the University of Illinois. They still do it at the Florida State University. So I don't know.
The Seminoles.
Yeah, and so yeah, it is still being. You still see sometimes 30 or 40,000 people at a Kansas City football game wearing red face or headdresses or doing tomahawk chops. So, people can pretend that we're not being mocked, but let's face it, it's the definition of mockery, even if it's not meant to be disparaging. And here's the other thing I'll say: for anybody who says, "Well, school never had any ill intentions towards Native people when they adopted these mascots," that's true. But you know what? They didn't have any consideration for us at all. It was never about us. It was about them. They had an image that they took. They added characteristics to that image. They created the image, and then they owned the image. And they did so as if we didn't exist anymore. So they treated us as relics of the past, as if we were an extinct people. And in fact, we have to confront this every single day with grown-ups because they grew up in that environment. Whether your school did or your rival school did, many people still have it embedded in their heads that that's what an Indian is. That's what a Native American is. I mean, so that's
So
part of the problem.
are you saying though, while we wrap this up, John, that when there could be, and you raised the point before, how would you say you wanted to honor African Americans? Well, you really could. How would you do that? Is there no way to? Is there no such thing as a respectful team name toward Native people?
Bears.
Then there's
No, I mean, if you're you look, the whole act of using a people for a mascot is dehumanizing. It also promotes stereotypes, which is wrong. Promoting stereotypes is discrimination. So there's no way to avoid the conversation. The truth of the matter is, and even the New York State Association of School Psychologists was in favor of a ban. Why? Because they found that this practice was harmful to both Native kids and non-Native kids, and those kids become adults, and those are the people we have to confront, whether it's in the news, whether it's in politics, whether it's in industry. We have to overcome the prejudice that they were taught even even when they were in grade school. So no, I it's not the specific words, although some are worse than others. Calling us savages and redskins and raiders, I think, is pretty insulting. Even if you're calling yourself that, but you really don't mean it in a negative way, you're saying you only mean it because it's a native image. No, it's the practice of using Native people for a mascot is dehumanizing. It's stereotypical, and it's a false stereotype at that.